Welcome to CarFling Asks. I forget what episode number this is, but today we are going to be discussing how people buy, how they make decisions, and I'm going to give you two tools that are going to help you look at that customer journey from a different perspective. So I wanted to talk today about something that is quite dear to my heart. I found that in my experience over the last couple of years that there's a massive discrepancy between the way that dealerships are set up to sell cars and the way in which consumers, people, me and you, go about buying cars and making, really big decisions. So today I wanted to share some of the insights from a couple of frameworks that we use in looking at building consumer buying journeys and decision-making models that will hopefully help dealerships understand the situations and contexts that consumers find themselves in, and maybe even be able to empathize with the places people are in their lives when they need to make these big decisions. When you look at the world through your product, every problem looks like a customer. But when you look at the world through the customer, it certainly doesn't look the same way. And I think typically when most businesses tend to look at how do I put this product into the market rather than saying how does this product fit into someone's life? How does this vehicle fit into their day to day? And yeah, I think it's an incredibly powerful perspective, and it's a complete shift. It's like a 360 complete reversal. You're looking at it from the demand side as opposed from the supply side. And I think when you look at it, the world through that perspective, it takes on you start looking at what sales is, what salespeople should do, and how they should interact and engage, and how you should sell. You look at it very differently. Buying is anything nowadays has changed fundamentally with the amount of information that we have available to ourselves. But I think the fundamental process and the way in which we make decisions as humans hasn't changed too much. There's a framework and jobs to be done which provides a timeline that allows us to be able to anchor the various different series or sequence of events that happen in someone's lives that lead them to buy something. So if you take any decision, someone decided to buy a car, extend a warranty, change their tires. If you trace back the steps, right to the beginning, what was the first event, the first triggering event that happened that caused them to start to look for a solution to a problem that they're experiencing? So what was that struggling moment that led to the need or the emergence of the need for the solution to solve? So I think an example would be looking at a consumer or that's taken their vehicle in for their last service. This is an obvious one. The vehicle at that point in time would be no longer covered by the maintenance or service plan or out of warranty. And now the consumer is at some risk. If something goes wrong, they're going to be on the hook to get it fixed. And a lot of the time that causes a bit of anxiety in someone's mind. They worry about that and think, is it time to get a new car or potentially buy an extended warranty? And there's a lot of things going through someone's mind at this point in time. But that's an example of what we call a trigger event. Another situation might be, for example, even tires wearing thin and needing to replace the tires and going to get a quote on what it costs to actually go put 4 new tires on the car. Sometimes it's enough to say, well, maybe I should just sell the car. Maybe let me just get rid of it right now and just so there's all these sorts of events that actually bring someone into the buying process or create the space in their mind for a new solution to exist. So I think within the context of cars, what makes it so complex is that there's so many considerations. It's such a big purchase that we have our normal lives that we have to get on with, and we seemingly have to take a lot out of our normal day-to-day life to be able to be in a position to understand what our options are. And then you take into consideration that varies wildly. Now you can imagine someone buying their first car. They've never bought a car before. They've never had any previous experience understanding finance or what it's like to be in a dealership is very different from, someone who's bought many cars before, knows exactly what they can afford, knows exactly what they want, knows exactly how to go about getting what they want, and it's just actually going straight for it. So you can already see, like, within that spectrum, that there's very different ways, and there may be similar stages that they might go through, but how fast they progress through those stages is going to differ wildly from person to person. And I think that's what makes sales complex, is because of the various different situations that someone might be in when they're looking to buy. And a salesperson, anyone in sales, has to quickly be able to calibrate and understand and get to a position where they can actually relate to where that customer is at that point in, that particular interaction. But I think, businesses tend to focus on a tiny sliver of an interaction, of a journey, which is like, the dealership visit, say, for instance, or the initial phone call after the submission of an inquiry via like an online platform. And we forget that there's all these things that have happened in someone's life that got them to the point where they were on, a platform, on a website, looking at a vehicle and went, today's the day I'm going to actually, inquire on this vehicle. What was everything else that happened to get to that point? And as a salesperson, you actually need to focus on getting the rest of the story, and being able to, like, say, well, what happened to cause you to start to looking? Like, what else have you looked at? Where are you in this process? You might not ask that question explicitly, but in the way that you engage, you want to be able to get to a point where you feel like you've got a good understanding of where that person is in their lives. So I think the timeline, or being able to assemble a picture of where someone is in their journey, is very important. Is probably one of the most important things, and really understanding the circumstances around the triggering event, like what happened to cause this journey or this person starting this journey. From the triggering event, you've got a phase of passive looking. So if you think about it, like, they'll start noticing, billboards, and they'll start noticing adverts on cars, and they'll start seeing what their friends drive. So there's some space in the mind, and now you're looking, and but passively looking. There's not enough energy yet. There's something hasn't happened that's serious enough to go, I need to, actually begin the active looking phase. So there's some sort of event, some sort of triggering event that actually transitions someone from going from passive looking to active looking. Typically, that's something like an introduction of like a time war or like a serious opportunity. The best way to explain this would be using an example. My cousin, her boyfriend had been thinking about getting a new car, but that had come from the fact that they went on a long trip. During the trip, they blew a tire. It was an FJ Cruiser, so it was very heavy on fuel, and I think the expense made him think, sure, this isn't something that I can continue with. It's at about the stage of life I might look at another vehicle. But what was quite interesting is that he came to a different conclusion, because they went away for a trip with some friends to Neisner, and one of their friends was actually immigrating overseas and was selling his car, and he had a Suzuki Swift. And it was purely opportunistic, but that single event, created up, the space in his mind to say, well, maybe I don't need to sell my FJ Cruiser, I can just use it less often, but maybe I can get a runaround car, a second car that I can use, to just, he's a doctor, to be able to get from, home to the hospital, and that's, less than 5 minutes away. So I think these events are not necessarily, it could be seeing a piece of advertising, it could be a friend mentioning the availability of a vehicle, but these sorts of events happen in our lives that trigger us to go from one stage to the next. But they're very distinct phases. There's the passive looking and active looking. So during the active looking phase, now suddenly, he was going on Auto Trader, going on cars, and looking for references in terms of price points to be able to understand what would be a fair price to pay for this vehicle. And, are there other options potentially at dealerships which might be a better choice? But that event had, triggered him into this active looking phase. And now he's inquiring, he's submitting. And that's typically where, as a dealership, they first, encounter a client where there's enough energy for them to commit to actually engaging in the, call it, buying process as we would know it. But again, there are these other phases of passive looking and the trigger event that would be, important to understand the journey that they've gone on to get to where they are when they actually now start, visiting the dealership or submitting inquiries. Then there's this point of moving from active looking into actually deciding. So that's something like where they've now assembled their options. They've now understand what the trade-offs are. If I go with this, then I can't get that, and they start looking at the choices that are available to them. And a lot of the times where people get stuck because, they might be looking at saying, do I go with a newer vehicle that's under like warranty or plan, and I don't have to worry about that, but I could spend the same money and get like, for example, a 1 Series BMW, or do I go for a new or nearly new, like a demo VW Polo? They're a similar amount of money, but like very different considerations. Like, am I prepared to take the risk associated? Like, I want the 1 Series, but I'm a bit uncertain as to what the implications are going to be in terms of the costs that I'm going to incur potentially owning that vehicle. So the trade-offs are, these are options. So manufacturers might look and think, Swifts and Polos compete, but in our world, like a new Polo competes against a used 1 Series, and I think there's important considerations to understand as a salesperson when you, because you might have an inquiry for a new Polo, but you don't realize that you're actually up against, a used 1 Series or, a 3, say, for instance, in someone's mind. So typically we move from active looking once we've assembled enough information to be in a position to understand what the options are. We then, shift into deciding where we actually make the trade-offs. And then there's the actual purchasing moment. We decide, we commit. And we've resolved some of those concerns in our mind. And then you go into using, which is the last phase. And then you assess the fitness of the solution that you chose to use. Does it live up to the expectations, that you had, the pretenses under which you had bought or made the purchasing decision? And that's where, some of the evaluation of, call it like someone's sales argumentation might come in. So if, the salesperson made certain promises about what this would do and how it would work and, the condition it was in, through the usage of it, does it meet what was it said? Did it do what it said it was going to do? And often this is where the seeds are sown of, kind of disappointment or, kind of where loyalty is built by a dealership, by a salesperson, more importantly, in terms of the relationship. And that's where referrals come from. So I think that's important. So just to recap, the phases there, it's like there's a trigger event, there's passive looking, active looking, deciding, the purchase moment and decision, and then you've got the actual usage or ongoing usage of the vehicle because it's something that you live with. And then there's the relationship and the experiences that you form by using the vehicle day in, day out. So that's what we call the timeline, and it's quite simple. And I think like once you start trying to put in your mind, based on like the conversations that you have, where you are in that process, it helps you be more deliberate about what to do next. So the next tool that we use is something that we call the customer forces. And it basically looks as we progress along this timeline, there are various different forces that we experience. And we classify these forces into 4 buckets. The first is kind of push. So you can think of this is the pain of the present, of the problem you're currently experiencing that kind of like give you the initial energy. It's like, if we look at it from the trigger event, it's like, the push really is around sort of the warranty expiring and the anxiety of like of thinking about different situations in which might arise where you are suddenly on the hook to have to pay a big bill, engine blowing up or something like that. I mean, that's what comes to mind if you don't know cars. And then you've got, on the other side, opposite push, you've got pull. And the pull is, you can think about it as like the draw or attractiveness of the new solution. So, it's this transformation in someone's mind that they make, saying like, I'm like anxious about something going wrong, to like, okay, I've got complete confidence for the next 3 years. I don't have to worry about a thing. So they start imagining themselves in the new car. Then they imagine and they use this incredible device we've got up here to kind of put themselves in a position where they're using the car, and they imagine the different things the benefits that they gain, and they try it on in their mind. They simulate what it's like owning. So that pull is like all the benefits that go along with owning that car. So typically that's where advertising and marketing stops. Very simplistic. It's like, speak to the problem, heighten the benefits of the solution, and we kind of think, there's enough motivation in there. If only you can just make someone motivated enough, they'll buy. But we tend to forget that there's actually a whole world underneath, the problem and the benefits in very simplistic terms. And this is like, as people, we know this. There's like inertia. There's the habits of the present. A lot of the time, like that's, wake up in the morning, it's the normal day-to-day things. The car's fine. It's not broken. It doesn't make any noises when I start. I don't feel any shuddering. Like, things seem to be fine. I don't have, the inertia is just the general day-to-day habits that kind of keep things. It's a status quo. It keeps things the way they are. And the status quo is a very powerful force. And typically, if there's not enough pain and there's not enough pull, status quo will always win out. It always just enforces the way it has and the way it will be. So what are the habits that are keeping things the way they are? The next thing that I think for me is probably the most significant factor that inhibits people making decisions and making progress towards their goals, particularly within cars. And that's, call it the friction, the anxiety about the future. So just as someone tries on, this, what it's like in their heads, simulating and imagining what it's like to own this vehicle, all the benefits, they also imagine all the negatives. You get people who are just very good at being able to think about all the bad things that will happen. You get people who are very good at like thinking about all the good things that will happen too. But generally, for the most part, anxiety is a very powerful force. And we tend to be very good and we tend to try and avoid loss. We try to avoid regret. And we go like, well, what if, what if something goes wrong? What if I lose my job and I can't afford the monthly installments? There's all number of situations that, and it's like, what if, these what ifs. And in a sales engagement, a lot of the time, those are insecurities that someone has. It's not someone like is going to go and, say, what, I didn't get the best performance review last month and I don't feel very secure in my employment and I don't know if, I can actually commit to this right now. They're not going to say that to you. They're just say, look, I've actually got a better deal at another dealership. They'll lie to you to tell you what you want to hear or don't want to hear rather. So they don't have to explain what the real reasons are that are stopping them from making progress. So I think like as a salesperson, as a dealership, like trying to address and understand like in a very empathetic way to try and get to what those concerns might be. For an inexperienced car buyer who's never bought a car before, you can imagine how anxiety-ridden they must be about that decision because, it's a major financial commitment if they're financing the vehicle. they're taking on like a major cost that would impact their lives if something were to go wrong. Now, there's a lot they don't know about, like, let alone the vehicle, but the way that the finance deal is structured. So remember, finance, insurance, the actual vehicle itself, all of these things kind of intersect in this one decision. So yeah, a lot of the time, sometimes they're not even, are there things that they should be aware of that they're not aware of? And I think that, anxiety, and just putting yourself in that position of going like, what, if I was buying my first car and I was in this situation, what would I be feeling? Like, what would I be anxious about? So I think these two tools, the timeline and the different stages of the buying process, and then the forces acting on someone, like, what are the things that are, what's motivating this person to want a new car? Like, what's happening in their life? Like, what's wrong with the current car? What is it about the car that they're interested in that's attractive to them? Is it because, I know from my personal experience, if you can imagine, you've had a student car, and you've had it for years, you've now been working for a while, and you kind of literally outgrown your car, and now suddenly you're in different social circles, and you don't want to be arriving with the car that you had that you're driving to university, and now you want to actually make a bit of a statement. You've got a limited budget, but you want to send the right message. So the motivations about, for someone buying their first car, it's far deeper than just being able to get to work, but it's about like what this says about who I am as a person. I want this to express and signal, to my friends and family that, I'm on the right journey. I'm making progress in my career. So, I'm buying this car because of what it says about me, as much as it is about what it can do for my life functioning. And I think that's an important consideration for someone to know. Like, that's a big motivational force. But at the same time, I'm experiencing these anxieties of, like, again, back to the example of like a new Polo versus a used 1 Series. Every new vehicle is the same, but each used vehicle is unique. How do I know this is the right one? That, there's a lot of anxiety about that. Like, what if I could get a better price at another dealership? I can't continue looking forever. At some point in time, I need to make a decision. So there's a limited selection that I can actually look at. So the anxieties that I'm feeling, like, how as a salesperson or as a dealership, could you address those concerns? What promises could you make me about the fears that I've got that are going to help me get to a point where I've got enough confidence and enough trust to actually go ahead with the deal? So yeah, I think, and obviously when you add to that, there's a whole climate of used cars and the stereotype, and no one wants to go to dealership, no one wants to take time out of their day. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's a huge amount of work to buy a car. And if we can help consumers, speaking as dealers, as retail professionals, how do we reduce the amount of decision making involved? How do we reduce the fear and anxiety and increase the amount of trust? And that's why people eventually just have their car guy. They outsource their decision making and go like, this is what I can see myself in. I don't want to actually have to go through the effort of having to go through this process of getting everything I need to know to be in a position to make a decision. Cars, you help me narrow down the options to like this or that, so I can be in a position to make a decision. So I think that's something just to bear in mind. Like, that's why, particularly with used cars, there's this stereotype of everyone having their car guy. You can obviously tell I'm quite passionate about used cars, but I think I'm even more passionate about, psychology and car buying, particularly. And it's something that just mystifies me because of how complex it is. So, yeah, I hope today's session or lecture or whatever you want to call it's been interesting. But yeah, looking forward to seeing some of the discussion in the comments.